Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. This afternoon, we're going to talk about dehumanization and how it contributes to a less safe community. So, we're really talking today about community defense, which is a really big part of Rainbow Connection. I think we emphasize the self defense aspect of it a lot, but part of taking care of ourselves is taking care of the community around us so that it's safer for us and those that are around us. So I wanted to talk about dehumanization and how it contributes to the statistics that are worse when it comes to violence against people that are marginalized. So women, people of color, people with disabilities, people who are homeless or using substances, people with mental illness. All of these are people that experience dehumanization at higher rates and experience violence at higher rates than people that don't have those qualities. So we want to talk about power plus prejudice when it comes to things like racism and sexism, or any of the isms. Prejudice is a bias against someone, but when you're talking about racism, you're talking about having that prejudice plus the power behind it to actually make lives worse. So if someone doesn't have that power behind it, then they may be prejudiced, but maybe they're not racist. So, for example, when you're talking about racism this way, you can't be racist against white people because white people do have more power in the community than people of color. So, we talk about degrading women. When we're talking about that, we're talking about using words that lead to women being dehumanized and lead to them being treated as less than men, which leads to some people feeling that it's okay to cause them harm. Our main goal is not to make those views seem appropriate to those who might cause harm, and also to not make people think that they're going to be harmed or that we're okay with harmful attitudes. So it's about making those that are around us feel safe and making those that might have those views that cause them to feel that it's okay to harm people, to make them realize that we're not okay with that. So in class, if we teach students not to react in certain ways to words. So, for example, not using a hammer fist to the back of the head just because someone called your mom ugly. It takes strength to not let words cause you to react in certain ways when you're more powerful than someone. But when you're not as powerful as they are, words can be an indicator that you're not safe in a space. Words that are connected to hate and violence and discrimination can cause fear, distrust, and guarding oneself in spaces where one should be able to be open. And we want people to feel safe with people that shouldn't be a threat to them and trust that what they're doing there is not going to get them hurt. So the people that are harmed or hurt by these terms already have to control themselves to avoid further harm constantly. So I think some people think that um, if you're affected by words, that means you're not as strong. But when you're not when you're not quite as powerful, you have to exhibit a lot of strength in order to avoid being further harmed by people who are using these words against you. So backlash can happen if they do speak up often. Um, and that could be being yelled at, being physically assaulted, or worse. So we don't want people to have to fear that if they hear words that are harmful, they'll face backlash if they bring it up. We don't want people to hear words that are harmful and be afraid that it will mean that we allow even worse things to happen. We want to have the reputation in our gym for and just in our regular lives for standing up for people who are at risk for harm. So um, what we do at this gym, I think, really embodies that we want people to feel less harmed. We want people to feel less hurt. We want people to feel safer and respected. And we do that by Jesse having the goal of passing out sleeping bags to people who could be harmed by the cold, or sitting next to a woman on the bus who's being verbally harassed and not tolerating hate in any form, because hate leads to more hate, which can lead to violence and discrimination. So let's talk a little bit about unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is just part of our nature. We categorize things or people, we assign values or traits to things or people based on our past experience. If we didn't do that, then we would move through the world a lot more slowly because we'd have to attribute new qualities to things every time we saw them. We know that a door is going to be able to be opened. We know that a wall will hurt us if we try to walk through it. We don't have to look at each individual door and each individual wall and figure those things out about those things. We just know from our history with them. So, but unconscious bias can cause discrimination and cause us to make bad decisions about how to react to people or things when it's based on stereotypes that aren't true. They're not something to be mad at ourselves about for having unconscious bias, but we do need to try to be aware of unconscious bias when it comes up and work to overcome it. Unconscious bias is often not in sync with our conscious values. So I'm guessing that none of us that are watching this video think I'm racist towards, certain people of color, or none of us think I don't like gay people, but those biases exist and they begin at a very young age. We also will talk about affinity bias when we're talking about unconscious bias. Affinity bias is a positive response to people who are similar to us. So it may come out as playing favorites when we don't realize that we're doing that with people that are more like us. It also comes out as hiring people that are more like us, and the inequities in people of color or women, or LGBTQ people at higher levels at companies, for example. Perception bias is the tendency to form stereotypes around certain groups that make it difficult to make an objective judgment about individual members of the group in either direction, good or bad. And confirmation bias is seeking out evidence that confirms our perceptions and ignoring contrary evidence. So, confirmation bias means that we are always looking for evidence that helps us to feel that we're right about how we feel about things. And if we see evidence that proves that we're wrong about those things, we often discount that evidence. So we want to model respect for those that are different than us through our words and through our actions. And this means changing deeply embedded habits, considering the implications of words and phrases that have gone unchallenged too long, and to be empathetic to those whose experience we may not share or understand. What I always say about this is that the question is not, why are we suddenly not allowed to say these things? The question really is, why has it ever been acceptable for us to say things that are harmful to people? Even if they're not physically harmful, why has it been acceptable for us to say things that cause hurt to other people? So slurs are maybe a slightly more dramatic example of how bias can come out. Slurs are derogatory terms that target individuals or groups on the basis of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, gender expression, disability, etc. Slurs are not the same thing as cursing. Cursing is words that cause offense to some people, but they're not words that cause harm to people. So there's a difference, and I think we need to realize there's a difference between slurs and between cursing, because some people are very offended by cursing, and yet will use slurs against people, and they don't realize that there's a big difference in the harm that's caused between those two types of words. So one thing that we can do when we're talking about um, not using language that is harmful to people, when we're talking about the gym, especially, and we're talking about self-defense, is we want to be careful not to use coded language. So coded language is terms that hide bias. So that's things like saying the thugs, or talking about how it's dangerous in the hood, talking about illegal aliens, and um, uh, words that basically are not in and of themselves a slur, but that hide a prejudice against a certain group of people. So there's a difference, and I think we're kind of talking about this, that between hurtful and harmful talk. So when someone talks about, well, men always do this, or white people shouldn't do that, maybe certain students not wanting to work with certain instructors at first until trust is built, because maybe the instructor is levels above in privilege than the person that they're working that is the student. Um, we need to realize that those things are hurtful. Maybe it may be hurtful to hear men always do this or that, but it's not harmful to men to say that men always do this and that, because there's not that power behind it. Stereotyping men by women is not harmful talk; it's hurtful talk potentially. And so I think that we need to realize when we're feeling hurt by someone below us in privilege, that we need to sit with those feelings of hurt and realize that it's not actually causing us harm. And again, that's just different than stereotyping people that are below us and have less privilege than we do. So I think we covered a lot in a short period of time. The last thing that I want to talk a little bit about is giving and accepting feedback when we inevitably do something or say something that isn't in line with how we want to act as um, either gym instructors or volunteers, or just as members of the gym, or again in society. So we want to model what we want to see with members and with each other. So, for example, if someone brings up something that is harmful, we say, hey, we talk about it this way here. Repeating what they say with the language that we prefer that they used. Correcting pronouns if they are not using pronouns appropriately. So that's all a part of modeling the behavior that we want to see. If we do end up doing something that is harmful, then we want to be called out. We want people to tell us and feel comfortable telling us that we've done something that is harmful. And so there's actually a couple different ways that someone can tell you um, that you've done something harmful. One is called calling out, and one is called calling in. So being called out is not a bad thing. It's up to us to control our emotions, to listen, to take what is said into consideration, and to apologize if it's appropriate. If we're feeling defensive, it's important to ask if maybe the conversation can be resumed later so that we can take some time to think and let our feelings settle. It's important to know that calling out is a way to try to maintain a relationship. If a member calls you out, it means that they believe you'll be willing to change, that you won't harm them for saying something, and that they like being around you enough to not to just leave or to talk negatively about you, or if we're talking about the gym, to not just go and talk negatively about the gym behind our backs. Um, Calling in is a little bit different. If someone's behavior is pretty blatantly wrong, or if you're the one affected by the action, it's not a bad thing to calmly call people out in front of people. But sometimes calling people in is a better way to go that avoids embarrassment. If you know someone will be willing to learn, and if you're not the person affected, or if you feel like you're able to do the calling in. So calling in involves deciding how to communicate to the person, pulling them aside after class, texting them, or just talking to them quietly, especially if it's something that should be addressed in the moment through an apology. Waiting until later may not work, so it may be kind of pulling them aside to talk to them in the moment. You'll mention what the action is and why it was harmful. You'll want to be willing to discuss it with them later, or refer them to someone who can discuss it with them if you're not sure how to guide them further about the topic. If their response is positive, then you want to tell them thank you for listening. If they're not positive, or they don't want to change their future behavior, if this is a gym situation, then you may want to talk to someone in the gym who is in a position that they can reiterate, this is how we act in this gym, and this is how we avoid harming each other. So our capacity to change people in the community through our example is really huge. I think it's important to know that as martial artists, or as people that are instructors, these things give us kind of a position of power that we can use to talk and create change among people in how they refer to other people, how they talk about people, how they use language to be not harmful. So I think we want to use that to our advantage, and again, just really model our behavior that we want to see and from other people. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I know I went through things fairly rapidly, and I'm very happy to have a continued conversation about any of these things with anyone that is interested. Feel free to message me. You can IM me. Um, you can ask questions on the comment section of this. And you can also text or call me at 520 232 4457. Thank you.